Hello again. I'm sure that some viewers will remember John Major, who was Prime Minister in 1993, trying to define Englishness by talking of cricket pitches, warm beer, and old maids biking to Holy Communion through the morning mist. This was taken, of course, from an essay written by George Orwell in 1941 called England, Your England. He wrote, that is to say, George Orwell wrote of green fields and red pillar boxes, and the whole thing was a reflection on what it meant to be English. Well, what does it mean? Is being born in England enough to make somebody English? Is there more to it than that? Can people who were born in India or Africa ever be considered English? I was prompted to think of this by something in this book on racism, which I've talked about more than once. The author, that's Ali Ratansi, hold up, have patience with me. Yeah, the author's a little ticked off with an English comedian called Bernard Manning, who has, by the way, been dead for 15 years. And considering this book was published in 2020, it could be a little bit more up to date. Here is what Ali Ratansi writes. The British comedian Bernard Manning often joked that just as a dog does not become a horse by being born in a stable, so Asians and blacks do not become English by being born in England. That dogs and horses are different species means that Manning's joke slides implicitly into a strong form of biological racism, implying that Asians and blacks are different species from whites. Manning's utterances chillingly recall the claim by Goebbels, one of Hitler's henchmen, that the fact that the Jew lives among us is no proof that he belongs with us, just as a flea does not become a domestic animal because it lives in the house. Going off at a slight tangent, have you ever in all your life heard anybody talking about a comedian's utterances? This is a perfect instance of what I was talking about the other day, about intellectuals and academics being unable to use ordinary language like the rest of us. Can any viewers honestly imagine talking of someone's utterances? Anyway, let's consider the substance of what is said here. It's not, of course, an original gag. Daniel O'Connell, the Irish politician, said in 1843 of the Duke of Wellington that the poor old Duke, what shall I say of him? To be sure he was born in Ireland, but being born in a stable does not make a man a horse. There's nothing racial about this, despite what Ali Ratansi, the author of that book, might say. This is more nationalist. There's a great deal of difference between nationalism and racism. I understand that the author disapproves of Bernard Manning's perspective, which I imagine means that he thinks that black people and those from South Asia born in England are English. That seems fairly reasonable. He's denouncing Bernard Manning for his racist viewpoints, so presumably he disagrees with him and feels the opposite case to Manning. I wonder how viewers think about this idea. Do you think that somebody born and brought up in Africa can become English by moving to England? Are people born in England automatically English regardless of where their parents were born? Or is it more complicated than that? I think it is. Let's look at one or two specific cases and see what we make of them. Imagine a child is born in Africa, is raised there in childhood, only moving to England when the parents decide to go there. Do we regard that child as African or English? If we feel that being born in Africa prevents a child from being properly English, then it is a bit hard on J.R.R. Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings. He was born and raised in Africa. Does that mean he was not in some sense really English? If we follow Ali Ratansi's logic, then I think that this would have to be so. We quoted George Orwell at the beginning of this video. He, of all people, seemed to know what it meant to be English. He writes very feelingly about the nature of England and the nature of Englishness, and what Englishness actually was to him. But wait a minute, he was born in India. Should we see him as Indian or English? What about Vivian Leigh and Rudyard Kipling? They were born in India as well. Should we view Kipling's poetry as English or Indian? You see what deep waters we get into when once we try to adopt the opposite view to Bernard Manning. One might argue that Tolkien cannot be regarded as African because his parents were not African and didn't think of themselves as such. They were living in Africa but did not adopt African customs or even change their own language. In that sense, it would be absurd to talk of Tolkien being African, or for that matter, George Orwell and Rudyard Kipling being Indian. The difficulty is, though, that we can say exactly the same thing about some people who come to England. That is to say, they do not regard themselves as English, preserve their own customs and identity, speak their own languages and identify themselves as Bengali or Sylheti, rather than English. In short, they are in a similar case to people like George Orwell's family, and the fact that they live elsewhere does not stop them feeling that they are really a different nationality from the country in which they live. I've known many people of Pakistani origin whose children, although born in England, refer to themselves as being Pakistanis. This is just the same as the English in India and colonial possessions in Africa in the last century. I'm not setting myself in any particular position here, merely thinking out loud. Those who watched the discussion which I had with the young woman who has the Middle English Manuscripts channel might like to know we are planning another debate, partly around the subject which I've looked at this morning. As I say, I don't have a fixed view on this, and I'd be curious to know what other people think.